The bells of the church echoed across Dar es Salaam, slow and heavy, as if they wanted the whole city to feel our sorrow. People filled the pews, their tears falling freely as they clutched each other and cried over my brother Cato. The coffin gleamed under the lights, polished so perfectly it almost looked unreal, like a stage prop. Everyone spoke of him as if the world had lost its brightest star, but I sat there numb, forcing my face to twist with grief I didn't feel. Something about all of it felt wrong. The photos of the so-called accident looked staged, like someone had arranged them to tell a story. The reports were vague, just words on paper that explained nothing. And whenever I asked my parents what really happened, their eyes darted away, their mouths busy with practiced lines about accepting fate and moving forward. I tried to believe them, I tried to let the tears fall naturally, but my heart was restless. Deep inside, a voice kept whispering that this funeral was not about death at all. It was a performance. And behind those black veils and heavy prayers, something darker was waiting to be revealed. The pastor's final words echoed in the air like a heavy curtain falling at the end of a play. Everyone's heads were bowed, some still weeping, others whispering prayers, when suddenly I felt it. A small vibration deep inside my purse. At first, I thought I imagined it. Who would dare to call during a funeral? But then it buzzed again, stronger this time. My stomach tightened. Slowly, carefully, I reached into my bag, trying not to draw attention. My fingers closed around the phone, my pulse quickening as if my own body already knew what was coming. When I pulled it out and looked at the screen, the world around me seemed to vanish. My breath caught. My hands froze. The message glowed back at me, simple words that turned my entire body cold. I'm alive. Don't trust them. Meet me at midnight. Signed, Cato. My brother. The brother everyone here was crying over, the one lying in that glossy coffin. The one I had just been forced to bury. My heart slammed so hard in my chest I thought the whole church would hear it. For a second, I almost screamed, almost let the truth burst out of me right there. But something stopped me. Instinct, fear. A sharp voice in my head that said, not now. Not here. I swallowed the scream and forced myself to stay still. My eyes darted around the room. The mourners still sobbed, their faces buried in handkerchiefs. But my parents stood stiff, side by side, their faces like stone carved for this performance. They didn't look at me, not once. And in that moment, I wondered. Did they know? Did they send this message as some cruel trick? Or were they the very ones my brother was warning me about? I tucked the phone back into my purse quickly, my hands shaking. I could still feel the weight of those words, burning like fire in my pocket. I tried to focus on the final prayers, but the church bells, the wailing, even the pastor's voice faded into a dull hum. All I could hear was Cato's voice in my head, whispering from the grave, telling me to meet him at midnight. Every glance felt dangerous. Every move my parents made suddenly looked suspicious. My mother's hand resting on my shoulder felt too heavy, too practiced. My father's slow nod at the pastor seemed more like a signal than respect. I sat frozen, tears rolling down my face, but they were no longer for grief. They were for fear. The coffin stood only a few steps away, covered in flowers, and I stared at it, my throat dry. Was it really empty? Was it filled with lies, just like everything else about this day? Around me, the crowd cried for a son they believed was gone. But I knew the truth now. Somewhere out there, my brother was alive. And at midnight, I was going to find him. The city was quiet that night, the kind of silence that makes every step sound louder than it should. I slipped out of the house carefully, my heart racing with every creak of the gate. The directions Cato had sent replayed in my mind again and again, like a secret map I couldn't afford to lose. I followed the path down empty streets, past shuttered shops and flickering lamps, until I reached the place. An old warehouse stood before me, abandoned and broken, its walls covered in peeling paint, its windows shattered like dark, watchful eyes. The night air was heavy, and I almost turned back. But then I saw movement in the shadows. He stepped forward slowly. My breath caught. My brother. Cato. His body was thinner, his clothes torn, his face marked with bruises, but his eyes, those familiar eyes, were alive, filled with both fear and fire. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I thought I was dreaming. Then he whispered my name, and the sound of it broke me. Tears rushed to my eyes as I stumbled toward him. I wanted to hug him, hold him, never let go, but his trembling hands stopped me. There's no time, he said, his voice low and broken. You need to listen. I stood frozen, my heart screaming with questions. He looked over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear from the darkness, then leaned close. His words poured out like poison I didn't want to swallow. He told me our parents had staged everything. The accident, the coffin, the funeral, all of it was a lie. Not because they loved him, but because they feared him. Cato had discovered their secrets. Hidden money, illegal dealings, accounts overseas filled with wealth stolen through bribes and fake charities. He had threatened to expose them, and they couldn't let that happen. They tried to erase me, he whispered, his voice breaking. They wanted the world to believe I was dead. They wanted you to mourn me and move on, while they kept everything under control. I shook my head, unable to believe, yet every word settled inside me like heavy stones. Suddenly, the coldness of our parents, their strange answers, their empty eyes, it all made sense. My hands trembled as Cato went on. I barely escaped, he said, lifting his sleeve to show deep cuts on his arm, bruises on his ribs. They sent people after me. I've been hiding ever since. Tears blurred my vision. Why me? Why tell me? I whispered. Because you're the only one I trust, he said. His voice cracked, but his eyes were steady. And because now they'll come for you too. You have to be careful. They're watching everything. The night closed in around us, the silence heavier than before. My brother stood alive before me, but the truth he carried was darker than death. Our parents weren't grieving parents. They were predators, hiding behind smiles and prayers. And now, knowing their secret, I realized one thing with terrifying clarity: nothing in my life would ever be the same again. The truth hit me like a knife twisting inside my chest. For days I had been walking around believing my parents were victims of grief, believing they were as broken as I was. But standing there in the darkness after Cato's confession, I finally understood. Mama and Baba were not just hiding secrets. They were the architects of them. The people who had raised me, kissed my forehead, and tucked me into bed were masterminds of a plan so dark it could destroy powerful men and women if it was ever revealed. They had built their empire on lies, money stolen through fake charities and bribes hidden far away in accounts no one was supposed to find. My brother had found them. And for that, they had tried to erase him. I walked home that night numb, my body moving but my mind spinning. Every memory of my parents felt poisoned now. Their soft smiles, their gentle words, the way they held my hands at the funeral, it was all performance, a trap meant to keep me quiet while they took everything from Cato. They hadn't just faked his death, they had taken control of his inheritance, his future, his name. And now, if they even suspected he was alive, they would finish what they started. I started to see it everywhere, the way they watched me. The small glances they exchanged at the dinner table, the phone calls they would stop speaking on the moment I entered the room. Their driver who suddenly appeared wherever I went, claiming it was for my safety. Their friends who asked too many questions with too bright smiles. It felt like invisible eyes followed me everywhere, like the walls of our home weren't walls at all but mirrors feeding back my every move. Fear lived in my throat, thick and choking. Cato's warning echoed in my ears: if they find out I reached you, we're both dead. I had to keep my face calm, my voice steady. I had to pretend I was still their good, obedient daughter, mourning my brother, trusting them completely. Inside, my heart was a storm. Outside, I played the part. Every hug from my mother now felt like a test, every soft question from my father like a trap. I smiled when they smiled, nodded when they spoke, all while feeling my stomach tighten with dread. I started checking my room for hidden cameras, whispering instead of speaking, and clutching my phone like a lifeline. In the quiet of my room at night, I would stare at the ceiling and wonder how far their power reached, how many people they owned. Could I even run? Could we even escape? The thought of losing Cato for real this time was unbearable. But the thought of staying under their roof, pretending not to know, pretending to be their daughter, felt worse. I was living in a cage made of blood ties and black lies, and now every breath was a countdown to the moment they found out. Every day after meeting Cato, my life became a movie where I had to act out every scene perfectly. On the outside, I was the grieving sister. I let my tears fall in public, clung to my parents at church and spoke softly about healing when their friends came over. I hugged Mama tightly and let her stroke my hair. I let Baba hold my hand at family dinners. I even thanked them for their support. But inside, my heart was pounding like a drum. I was not grieving anymore. I was hunting. And if I slipped even once, I knew both Cato and I would disappear for real this time. Kato and I whispered plans on hidden calls and secret meetings at night. He taught me where to look, how to move without drawing attention. I started planting small recorders in their offices and bedrooms, tiny enough to hide in a vase or under a chair. At night, while they slept, I crept through the house, opening drawers with shaking hands, scrolling through files on their laptops, taking photos with my phone and sending them to Kato. Every time I found something, my hands trembled but I kept going. Every dinner turned into a performance I had to perfect. I sat at the table, smiling and nodding while my parents spoke about their charity work, about the good they were doing for the community. I wanted to scream, to throw the food off the table, to shout the truth. But I couldn't. I chewed my food slowly, nodded at the right times, and pretended to believe their lies. All the while my pockets were full of evidence they didn't know I had. Every hug from my mother now felt like poison seeping into my skin. Her perfume, once comforting, now smelled like danger. My father's calm voice, once strong and protective, now sounded like a snake wrapping itself around me. But I kept playing my part because that was the only way to survive. Piece by piece, the picture began to form. Bank statements, secret contracts, hidden transfers, names of powerful people tied to my parents' charity empire. Money meant for schools and hospitals was being washed clean and hidden overseas. Bribes were disguised as donations. Everything Kato had said was true, and the deeper I dug, the darker it became. Sometimes I wanted to stop. Sometimes I wanted to run. But then I'd remember Kato's bruises, his thin face, and the terror in his eyes. I learned to live two lives. By day, the broken daughter everyone pitied. By night, the spy collecting proof of the empire that had stolen my brother's life. Every smile, every tear, every word was a mask I wore. And with every secret I uncovered, I felt myself moving closer to the edge of something huge, something dangerous. One mistake, one wrong move, and the game of pretend would be over, and so would we. The night I made my mistake still plays in my head like a slow nightmare. I had been careful for weeks, moving like a ghost through the mansion, hiding my tools, double-checking every drawer before leaving. But that night my hands were shaking. I had just finished recording another whispered phone call between Mama and Baba about money transfers and secret accounts. I was tired, my nerves raw, and in my rush to slip back to my room, I forgot. The small black recorder, no bigger than a lighter, lay hidden under the edge of my father's desk. I didn't notice until I was already in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart hammering. I wanted to run back, but the house was quiet and awake at the same time, like it was holding its breath. All I could do was wait and pray. The next morning was wrong from the start. The mansion, usually full of busy footsteps and hushed voices, was silent. When I walked into the dining room, the air smelled of roses and something too sweet. Mama and Baba were sitting at the table, waiting for me, smiling in a way that made my stomach twist. My father poured me tea himself, his hands steady, his smile soft. Mama asked about my studies, my dreams, my future, her voice like honey. They laughed at little jokes, touched my hand, told me how proud they were. But their eyes were empty. Dead. Watching. Measuring. Every sip of tea tasted like poison. I tried to smile back, my hands shaking under the table. My heart beat so loud I thought they could hear it. I knew then, they had found the recorder. They knew everything. I was sitting at the same table as two people who might have already decided how to destroy me, and I couldn't let them see my fear. Then Mama leaned closer, her hand brushing mine. Her voice dropped, soft and sharp like a blade hidden in silk. You know, darling, she said, her smile never fading, some people don't live long when they poke their noses where they don't belong. The words slipped into my skin like ice. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. My father's eyes flicked to hers, then to me, a silent message passing between them. They weren't asking questions anymore. They were warning me. I forced a laugh, as if she'd made a joke, but my blood had turned cold. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but my legs stayed still. I thanked them for the tea, excused myself, and walked slowly out of the room, my back straight even as my hands trembled. The moment I reached the hallway, the mask cracked. Tears burned my eyes, but I kept moving. They knew. And now the game was no longer about pretending to grieve. It was about surviving long enough to bring their empire down. One wrong move, and they wouldn't have to fake another funeral. This time, it would be mine. The night of the gala felt like the longest night of my life. The hall was glowing with golden lights and soft music, filled with powerful people in expensive suits and glittering dresses. Waiters floated between the tables carrying trays of champagne. Everyone was smiling, clapping, taking pictures. Even the president was there, sitting at the center table, nodding politely as speeches about charity and hope filled the air. It was the perfect scene for my parents, the perfect stage for their lie. And it was exactly where I was going to destroy it. I walked into the room with my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. My hands were cold and trembling, but my face wore the same mask I had practiced for weeks, the dutiful, grieving daughter, still proud of her parents. My mother waved at me from across the hall with that same sweet smile. My father whispered to a man in a black suit, not even looking at me. They had no idea what was coming. When the speeches ended, I stood up. My knees felt weak but I forced them to move. Every step toward the stage felt like walking through fire. The microphone was waiting, the big screen behind me glowing blue. People stared, confused. I could feel my parents' eyes on me, sharp and cold. I plugged my phone into the screen. My fingers almost slipped but I held on. In an instant, the music stopped. The lights dimmed. Then the first video appeared. My father's voice, low and secretive, talking about hidden accounts. My mother's laugh as she named the politicians they were paying off. Bank statements flashed across the screen. Audio files played one after another. The crowd gasped. Some people stood up. Cameras clicked. Whispers turned into shouts. And then, the biggest shock of all. The doors at the back opened. My brother stepped in. Kato. Alive. Thin, pale, but standing tall. Gasps and screams filled the hall as he walked to the stage. Some people clapped. Others just stared, their hands over their mouths. My parents froze in their seats. My mother's face went pale, her smile finally gone. My father gripped the edge of the table like it could save him. Kato stood beside me, his eyes shining with tears but steady. I took the microphone, my voice shaking but strong. "This is the truth," I said. "This is who they really are." And I let the evidence speak for itself. Every file, every recording, every secret they had buried played in front of the world, including the president. Security guards began to move. Phones filmed from every angle. Reporters shouted questions. My parents tried to stand, to speak, but it was too late. Their empire wasn't crumbling slowly. It was collapsing in real time, right there under the golden lights. For the first time in months, I felt air fill my lungs. I wasn't pretending anymore. The mask was gone. Beside me, Kato reached for my hand. Together we stood as the truth exploded around us, unstoppable. The gala didn't end with clapping or cheers. It ended with chaos. Sirens wailed outside, red and blue lights flashing through the tall glass windows as police officers stormed in. The crowd parted in shock as my parents were pulled from their seats. Mama screamed, her perfect dress torn as she tried to twist away. Baba shouted about lies, about conspiracies, his voice breaking as handcuffs locked around his wrists. The people who once bowed to them now stared in disgust. Their empire, their image, their perfect legacy, was gone in minutes. Kato and I stood side by side on the stage, watching it all unfold. For so long, I had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt heavy, raw, like standing over the ashes of a home you once loved. My heart ached, not because I wanted to protect them, but because the people I thought were my parents had never really existed. They were ghosts dressed in lies. As the hall emptied and the police cars pulled away, silence fell. Kato reached for my hand, his grip firm, grounding me. We were free, yes, but the scars would never leave us. The real funeral that night wasn't for Kato. It was for the family we thought we had, the love that had been nothing more than a mask. When we finally stepped outside, the first light of dawn touched the sky. The air was cool, sharp, alive. I looked at my brother and felt something I hadn't felt in months, hope. Blood may bind, I thought, but lies can break everything. Only truth sets you free. And for the first time, we were free.